I just played full sessions of Beat Saber and SuperHot VR with a pair of Switch Joy-Cons and an iPhone, propped up against my TV like it was a Wii. No headset, no sensors, just some very cool software I'll explain in a minute, and it worked. Real quick, if you're new here, hey, I'm Coulter. On this channel we cover console mods, janky DIY tech projects, weird handheld gaming, and generally doing things hardware wasn't designed to do. So if that's something you, be sure to subscribe down below so you don't miss future videos. So I stumbled upon PortalVR Motion on Twitter a while back, as I typically do when trying to find cool new stuff. I don't know, I don't like Twitter, but I like what I find on Twitter. It's a weird dichotomy. But I thought this project looked super cool, so I reached out to the team, and they were super chill bros. They sent me a key to check it out in the channel, so big shout out to them for that. And their Steam page actually just went up, so a link to that in the description, and I encourage you to waitlist this thing to help them out. But the concept is this: you pair your Switch or Switch 2 Joy-Cons to your Windows PC over Bluetooth. Switch 2 Joy-Cons are actually better because they have the magnometer in them that keeps the rotational tracking noticeably more intact. But you pair your Joy-Cons to the PC, you prop your iPhone up somewhere within line of sight so that it can see you holding your Joy-Cons in your hands there. And then PortalVR Motion takes the Joy-Con gyro data and the iPhone camera tracking and depth sensor data and feeds all that into Steam VR as a virtual headset and controller inputs. And so Steam VR thinks you're just using a normal headset with two controllers like anyone else, but really you're just looking at a TV holding two Joy-Cons, kind of like you're playing with the Wii Remote nunchuck back in the day. And the VR games are none the wiser that you're not using an actual headset. And side note, there's actually an even higher tier setup where with PortalVR Motion, you can use a MetaQuest or a Pico headset. You can plug it into USB using a developer mode, and then you can use the native controllers and I think the headset tracking in reverse. Don't quote me on the last part, but according to them, that's supposed to get you the highest precision setup the PortalVR Motion can get you. I went with iPhone and Joy-Cons because that's what I have, and also because that's probably what most people have lying around, which the fact that some relatively inexpensive software plus stuff you're lying around can enable an entire category of gaming on Steam that you couldn't otherwise play is pretty sick. But yeah, in case you have some spare VR hardware lying around, but you don't like putting the headset on, that pathway is for you. Now, a few things worth knowing going in. This is Windows only, right now at least. The version of the software I'm using is the version released in late June 2026. So depending on when you're watching this video or when it's released, the software may have evolved because they seem to have some pretty cool things cooking pretty fast on this. On the iPhone side, you'll just need any iPhone with Face ID because that front-facing camera with the depth sensor is pretty critical. And I think that's everything back to the iPhone 10, 10s, and 10R and all that. And as far as the software, at least at the time of this video, I believe it's $30 US on Steam, which is, like I said, quite a steal to take hardware you probably have lying around to have a whole cool new way to play a VR game without having a sweaty headset on. Like, okay. But that's what we're here to find out today. Is this actual VR, or is it kind of a work in progress tech demo that's getting somewhere? Well, let's find out. So as for actually setting this up and installing it, first things first, you install PortalVR Motion on your Windows machine. Like you'd expect, it is software. And you can install either the standalone Windows exe, or if the Steam version is now fully released when you're watching this, you can also just purchase and download it through Steam, which is probably the easier way to go. And then when you boot it up, it hooks itself into Steam VR. And the reason this matters is that anytime Steam VR would have been invoked by a VR game, PortalVR Motion is sitting in the middle, ready to pass your Joy-Con and iPhone data along as the virtual inputs. And so you just launch any VR game like you usually would, and then the Joy-Con tracking and all that is already in place, and that part went really well. Step 2 is actually pairing your Joy-Cons, and it's pretty easy. The little onboarding wizard in PortalVR Motion guides you through step by step what to do and gives little diagrams. And essentially you just pair one Joy-Con to your PC at a time by holding the sync button until it goes solid and the screen tells you, hey, I see your Joy-Con. And then you calibrate it so that the software can interpret the Joy-Con data properly in 3D space. So first you lay it flat on a table, let it get that calibration data for what a flat horizontal plane looks like, and then it tells you to pull either the ZL or ZR button and slowly rotate it in every little angle you can come up with and following the diagram until the software has seen the Joy-Con pointed in every direction and knows, okay, this is kind of what that's gonna look like, and this is how I'll translate that input into a VR controller interpretation, I guess. The first couple times I did this, I was going a little too fast or wasn't quite finding the right angles, but you do it a couple times and then you'll find your technique on how to calibrate it successfully on the first try. Now, hot tip, and this is probably specific to the version I'm on, and it'll probably smooth out over time, but after calibration, it tells you to hold both sync buttons until they go solid so that both Joy-Cons are paired to the PC at the same time. And I could only ever seem to pair one at a time until a hot tip on the Discord. And if you have any trouble, I definitely recommend checking out the PortalVR Discord. They have a lot of enthused and helpful people in there. But all I had to do was toggle off Bluetooth in the Windows settings, toggle it back on, and then back in the onboarding, holding both sync buttons suddenly worked, and both Joy-Cons were paired at the same time to the PC, no problem. So I'm guessing that like flushes the Bluetooth stack or something like that, but hopefully that saves you the 10 or so confused minutes minutes I spent trying to troubleshoot that. But from there, the iPhone. And this part's quite easy. It tells you, hey, scan this QR code to install this PortalVR app, connect it to your PC with a cable. When the iPhone prompts you, make sure you hit trust on your PC so that your PC and iPhone can talk to each other. And then you just prop it up in a way where your iPhone can see what your hands are doing while you're playing. And in my case, in my living room, I was actually just able to prop it up just between the mantle and the like under bump of the TV and just get it to point perfectly down to where my hands were. But something a little less janky, they have a stand that they link to from their website they recommend, or you could probably just 3D print something if that's your speed. And if you're watching this channel, it probably is. And if worse comes to worse, there's always like, you know, a hefty mug and some tape to make sure it's in place. But whatever works for you, just get it pointed in the right direction and make sure that the PortalVR Motion software accepts like, oh yeah, I see your iPhone, and then you're good to go. But with all that done, it then tells you, okay, point your Joy-Cons at the screen, hit plus to center them, which gives the software a center reference point to get a final calibration marker of what the Joy-Con movements mean in VR space. But from here, you're finally in your VR, not VR world. And the first mechanic to figure out is looking around. And since you don't have a headset on, your virtual camera doesn't move with your head. Instead, you hold either like the inner bumpers or the L or R bumper, and you actually just tilt the Joy-Con to simulate your head looking around. And then you can move the Joy-Con forward, back, left, right to simulate you moving around the space, you know, or you can actually just walk around while holding that button if you want to, you know, get your body involved a little more. But like their instructions show, you can kind of get used to the pitch, yaw, and roll. And it does take a few minutes to get used to this, especially if you've had an actual VR headset on before and been looking around, you know kind of what to expect in certain games. But after about a minute, you get the gist, and after maybe 10 to 15 minutes, you kind of start to develop a little technique on how to play the game while including your head movement as part of the controls to play the game. And it doesn't get in the way as much as you think. Just think back in the day with the Wii and the nunchuck and pretend the nunchuck movement is just looking around your head like you're playing, I don't know, Metroid Prime or something. It's like that, but just with gyro controls instead. By the way, if janky hardware and setups like this are your thing, and I'm guessing they are since you're this far into a video about playing VR with Joy-Cons, then maybe consider subscribing down below, because we're on the way to 100K subs, and so I'd super appreciate if you consider subscribing. But now it's time to game on this thing, and first off, Beat Saber. I started on easy because I didn't want to assume that I'd immediately shred on a control scheme I'd never used before, and also I'm pretty like mid at Beat Saber anyway. The Saber showed up where my hands were and they were pointing in the right directions. The swings registered cleanly and it didn't feel like there was any lag with the song or anything. Like, it felt like Beat Saber, but as a kind of Wii game, which is pretty sick considering that we were using like half the hardware and sensors that this game was designed for. There was only one thing I didn't count for though, and that was because I had a couple of people in the room that apparently were in the view of the iPhone, and so every now and again, including while I was filming some of this B-roll, the iPhone would occasionally start tracking their hand movements in the background mid-song. And so my Joy-Con mapping would get confused and think, oh, you must suddenly be like way over there. And so all of a sudden my Saber would be like pointed like way to the left, and so I'd miss a note. And so to circumvent that, before I realized what was actually happening, I just got in the habit of pointing my Joy-Cons at the iPhone and pushing plus to recenter them to get back on track. But yeah, definitely a little word of caution to keep in mind is that the iPhone should be pointed at your play space and maybe try to keep other people's hands out of the view. And if you do that, this issue probably won't arise for you at all. But as always, you can learn from my wasting of time, because that's kind of what this channel is for, I guess. But with a few rounds of Beat Saber enjoyed, it's time to check out SuperHot. And this was the more interesting test because SuperHot VR actually requires you to look around. That's core to the mechanic. Enemies only move when you move and look around and all that. And so both controlling your arms and movements in space while also controlling your head definitely required a little bit of rethinking of how I play this game, especially because I've played SuperHot VR before, and I think I've played it at every VR arcade I visited on top of when I've owned VR headsets. But slowly but surely, I kind of figured out my pattern and my muscle memory, and I was able to progress through the levels, as well as my brother, who you'll see in some of the B-roll here as well. But once you start to realize, okay, so I'm about to use my right arm for that, and so I'll hold my left bumper and tilt my head here, and then kind of move my body here and grab that, and then shoot that gun, and then kind of tilt myself here and do that. And then, okay, now I need my left hand, so I'll just like flip, and my right hand is controlling my head, and I'll do this over here, this over here, like, especially if there's games that you've played before and are a little too easy for you, this does add a little extra challenge, at least at first, while you're kind of figuring out your head movements and all that. So take it from me, definitely doable. Might take you, you know, maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes to kind of find your split hand maneuvering you need for these more full body grabbing games like SuperHot, where you're grabbing bottles and guns and this and that, but it is indeed figure outable. And when in doubt, you can just clench your fists in the game and swing your punches wildly, and you'll probably end up hitting all the bad guys and move on to the next level. So just like when we were 5, when in doubt, button mash. But the part of the setup I generally didn't expect is that playing without a headset meant the people in the room could really follow along and engage with me a lot better, whereas in a normal VR headset, you know, you're just a guy making weird movements with the headset on while everyone else is wondering, what's that guy doing? Like, yes, you can cast the display, but you know, usually you have kind of some audio going on, and with the face on, like, you're pretty disconnected from the room. But I found this to be way more social, and I could hold conversations and actually, you know, like, look at someone when I'm talking to them, instead of a whole, like, you know, yeah, what? Okay, yeah, thanks. Like, just like, you're clearly interrupting me. Okay, I'm gonna go back into my little antisocial space. And so yeah, if you want to show off some VR to a room full of people, or turn this into more of a pass and play, you know, old school Wii bowling, Wii boxing kind of thing, then this did a surprisingly good job at that. You know, as long as you don't get their hands in the iPhone tracking and screw things up. So, PortalVR Motion, is it a work in progress? Sure, you know, the Bluetooth flush thing, pairing and calibrating the Joycons, I had a little hiccup here and there, that issue where the iPhone was picking up other people, but these are kind of expected rough edges given that the software is still quite fresh and I think in beta, or at the very least, very rapidly evolving as if it was beta. But the developer has told me there are updates coming soon that are going to dramatically improve the onboarding process and add some really cool features, which I don't think I can share here. What I can say is this project has some clear and active momentum and some very cool stuff ahead. And I definitely recommend wishlisting this game on Steam to help support them. And even if you're loosely interested in purchasing it when it comes out on Steam, I had a great time. And if you have any VR titles in your Steam library, this I think deserves to live right next to them as a really cool tool that enables you to play them in a very different way with a lot less hardware strapped to your face. And like, yeah, for 30 bucks, like, come on, like, that's actually a pretty sick deal. I don't know, I'm hyping PortalVR Motion pretty hard. Again, they didn't pay me to say any of this, they just sent over the code and said, have fun, let me know if you need any help. But I think this is a really cool example of some out-of-the-box thinking in a space that seems to be drifting toward more expensive headsets. And I don't know, VR and VR gaming and headsets seems to be a little bit in a confused space on where they headed, but oftentimes a way to help us clarify where we're headed is to just have a little nudge from a very different direction like this to help us think, yeah, maybe we want to consider this aspect, like the social in the room aspect or the pass and play aspect, and maybe having the face mold custom molded to one person's face so you can't share it is a con and not a pro, you know, like the BigScreen VR. So especially if you have no plans on spending a few $100s on a VR headset, but you have VR games you want to play, then I think this is worth trying at least. What do you think? Would you actually play VR games with Joy-Cons, or is a proper headset the only way you're gonna play VR? Drop a controller emoji in the comments if you're gonna try out the Joy-Con variety, or at least interested in that, or a glasses emoji if you are headset or nothing. Very curious to see where that poll lands there. And if you want more unusual VR setup videos, you'll probably enjoy the one that came out last week where I took Nintendo's fake Virtual Boy they released earlier this year and crammed enough new hardware in there, where I took Nintendo's fake Virtual Boy toy they came out with earlier this year and crammed enough hardware and guts to turn it into an actual Virtual Boy, which was quite a journey to get there. So go ahead and check that one out, and I'll see you in the next one.